Yeah, I'm in an Uber right now. Driver's like ancient. Probably couldn't get a real job. Kyle Chen was on his phone, speaker not quite private but loud enough for Richard Morrison in the driver's seat to hear every word. The phone was pressed against Kyle's ear, but his voice carried in the enclosed space of the Toyota Camry. Kyle continued, laughing with the casual cruelty of someone who'd never known real hardship. I know, right? I'm 26, just got promoted to senior engineer at the startup, $180,000 salary plus equity, and this guy's what, 70? Still driving strangers around for what, $5 a ride after gas? What did you do with your life, bro? His friend on the phone said something. Kyle laughed harder, the kind of laugh that comes easy when you're young, successful, and certain the world belongs to you. Exactly. That's what I'm saying. Our generation, we're hustling, we're building, we're disrupting industries. We're not going to end up driving Uber at 70. That's a you problem, not an economy problem. You had decades to figure it out. Richard Morrison glanced in the rearview mirror. Kyle was completely oblivious, scrolling Instagram with one hand while trash-talking with the other, his expensive sneakers propped against the back of the passenger seat, AirPods dangling from his collar. Anyway, I'll hit you up when I get home. We're going to that new rooftop bar Saturday, right? Yeah, perfect. Later. Kyle hung up, looked out the window at the passing city lights. Then, as an afterthought, "Hey driver, you can take the highway. Faster." "Yes, sir," Richard said evenly, his voice calm, measured, the voice of someone who'd given orders to thousands and taken them from presidents. Kyle put his AirPods back in, tuned out the world, his head bobbing slightly to whatever music filled his ears. But Richard didn't tune out. He'd heard it all, every word, the dismissal, the arrogance, the casual assumption that a 70-year-old Uber driver was a failure, a cautionary tale, someone who'd made all the wrong choices and ended up exactly where he deserved. Kyle didn't know. He couldn't know. He didn't know that the man driving him, this ancient driver in a clean but aging Camry, had once commanded 10,000 soldiers in combat, had made split-second decisions that saved lives and ended battles, had stood in the Situation Room with presidents, in command tents with generals, in peace negotiations with foreign leaders. He didn't know that Richard Morrison had 2 Bronze Stars, a Silver Star, and a Legion of Merit, that his tactics were taught at West Point, that soldiers who'd served under him still sent him Christmas cards, still called him Sir, still told their children about the general who brought them home alive. But tonight, in this Uber, on this ordinary Tuesday evening in Washington, D.C., Kyle would find out, and he would never, ever forget it. Richard Morrison, 70 years old, had been driving for Uber for 3 years and 4 months. Not because he needed the money. His 3-star general's pension was more than comfortable, and his wife Margaret had her own retirement from teaching. Not because he was bored, though Margaret did sometimes joke that he was underfoot too much at home. He drove because service was in his DNA. 35 years in the Army hadn't just been a career. It had been an identity. When he'd retired in 2015, receiving his 3rd star and a standing ovation at the Pentagon, he'd thought he was ready for civilian life. Golf, grandchildren, maybe some consulting work. But after 6 months, he'd felt hollow, purposeless. He'd been a man who'd commanded divisions, who'd planned operations, who'd made decisions that affected thousands of lives. And now he was, what? Watching cable news? Mowing the lawn? Margaret had been the one to suggest it, actually. "You miss helping people," she'd said one morning over coffee. "So go help people, drive them places, listen to them, serve." So he'd signed up for Uber, downloaded the app, passed the background check in about 30 seconds. The FBI had files on him going back to 1980, all of them spotless, and he'd started driving. His Toyota Camry was always immaculate, water bottles in the backseat pocket, phone charger available. He kept the temperature comfortable, the music low, the conversation optional. His rating after 8,247 trips, 4.97 stars. The few negative reviews complained he drove too carefully or was too quiet. He didn't mind. He wasn't doing this for ratings. Most passengers were polite. Some were chatty, telling him about their days, their jobs, their relationships. He listened, offered gentle advice when asked, stayed silent when they just needed someone to talk at. Some passengers were silent themselves, lost in phones or thoughts. That was fine too. And then there were passengers like Kyle, young, successful, completely certain of their own brilliance and the world's meritocracy. They saw an elderly Uber driver and made instant calculations: failure, poor planning, lack of ambition, maybe addiction or divorce or just bad luck. Richard had learned not to correct them. What was the point? He didn't need their validation. He knew who he was. But tonight felt different. Maybe it was Kyle's particular brand of casual cruelty. Maybe it was the phone call, the mocking laughter, the assumption that Richard could hear but wouldn't matter. Maybe it was just timing. Whatever it was, tonight the truth would come out. Kyle took out one AirPod as they merged onto the highway. "Hey, driver, quick question." "Yes, sir?" Richard kept his eyes on the road. Smooth lane change, perfect following distance. "How long have you been doing this? Like, the Uber thing?" 3 years, sir." 3 years? Kyle's tone was a mix of curiosity and pity. "Okay. And before that? What did you do?" Richard considered how to answer. He could tell the truth, but the truth would sound like bragging, or worse, like he was trying to impress a 26-year-old. So he gave his standard deflection. "I worked for the government." "Oh, yeah?" Kyle leaned forward slightly, interested now. "Like what? Pentagon? I have some buddies who work there. Program managers mostly. Good pay." "Something like that." "What department?" "Defense." "Nice, nice." Kyle nodded, already losing interest, already building his narrative. "So you retired. What? Pension wasn't enough? I mean, government pensions used to be solid, but I guess with inflation—" "The pension is fine," Richard said quietly. "I do this to stay active." Kyle laughed. "Not mean exactly, but not kind either." "Active? Dude, there are better ways to stay active. My dad's your age, he plays tennis, volunteers at the library. You don't need to drive Uber to stay active." "Different people find purpose in different ways," Richard said. "I guess?" Kyle settled back. "But like, real talk, how much do you actually make? After gas, after Uber's cut, after taxes? Can't be much." Richard didn't answer immediately. He'd heard this question before, usually from people who genuinely wanted to understand the gig economy, sometimes from people who wanted to feel superior. Kyle was clearly the latter. "Enough for my needs," Richard said. "That's not an answer." Kyle pulled out his phone, started typing. "Let's see. Average Uber driver makes what, 15 an hour after expenses? You drive, what, 8 hours a day?" "About 6. Okay, 6 hours. Times 15, that's $90 a day. Times 5 days a week, that's $450. Times 50 weeks, that's $22,000 a year." Kyle looked up, triumphant in his math. "Dude, that's poverty level. My rent is more than that." Richard merged into the exit lane. "Like I said, sir, different people have different needs." "Yeah, but come on." Kyle was on a roll now, the way people get when they think they're being helpful, when they think they're the first person to point out an obvious truth. "You should be retired, on a beach, traveling, not doing this. This is just, I mean, no offense, but it's kind of depressing." Richard pulled up to a red light. In the mirror, he could see Kyle's face, young, unlined, confident in the way only youth and success can make you. He'd been that young once, that confident. He'd also been that wrong about a lot of things. The light turned green. "We all serve in different ways," Richard said quietly, more to himself than to Kyle. Kyle didn't hear. He'd already put his AirPods back in. They were 10 minutes from Kyle's apartment when Richard reached for the radio. He usually left it off when passengers were present, but something, instinct maybe, or fate, made him turn it on. The local NPR station was mid-sentence. Memorial service held today at Arlington National Cemetery, honoring the military career of retired Lieutenant General Richard Morrison, who served with distinction for 35 years. Richard's hand froze on the dial. Kyle's head snapped up. He yanked out an AirPod. Wait, don't change it! General Morrison commanded the 3rd Infantry Division during the Second Iraq War, leading over 10,000 troops in some of the conflict's most challenging operations. His tactical innovations in urban warfare are still studied at military academies worldwide. Kyle was fumbling with his phone now, typing frantically. Morrison, that's your name. On the app. Richard Morrison. Richard said nothing, just drove. Awarded 2 Bronze Stars, a Silver Star, and the Legion of Merit. At today's ceremony, Defense Secretary James Mattis said, and I quote, "Dick Morrison represents everything great about American military leadership, brilliant, compassionate, and utterly devoted to the soldiers under his command." Kyle's phone screen lit up with Google results. Photos loaded. A man in army dress uniform, 3 silver stars on his shoulders, medals covering his chest, standing at attention beside a tank. The same photo was replicated across a dozen military history websites, Wikipedia, news articles. Kyle looked at the photo, looked at Richard's reflection in the rearview mirror, back at the photo. The face was older now, grayer, more lined, but unmistakably the same. "Holy shit," Kyle whispered. "Holy shit, that's you." Richard pulled into a parking spot outside Kyle's apartment building. Put the car in park, turned off the radio. The sudden silence was loud. Kyle sat frozen in the back seat. You're a 3-star general?" "Was," Richard corrected gently. "I retired in 2015. "And you're driving Uber?" It wasn't a question. More like Kyle was trying to make the pieces fit, trying to reconcile the decorated war hero on his phone with the old man in the driver's seat. "Yes. But why?" Kyle's voice had completely changed. The arrogance was gone, replaced by genuine confusion. "You have a pension. You commanded divisions. You were in the Situation Room. Why are you doing this?" Richard turned in his seat, looked at Kyle directly for the first time. "Because I can. Because I choose to. Because serving doesn't stop just because you take off the uniform." "But this isn't," Kyle struggled. "This isn't the same. You were a general. This is just..." "Just what?" Richard's voice was still calm, but there was steel underneath now. "Just driving? Just helping people get where they need to go? Just making someone's day a little easier?" Kyle opened his mouth, closed it. "I spent 35 years in the Army," Richard continued. "I gave orders that sent men into danger. I made decisions that saved lives and cost lives. I stood in rooms where we planned wars and negotiated peace. And yes, that was important. That was service." He gestured around the car. "This is also service. Different scale, different stakes. But when I pick up a nurse at 6 a.m. and get her to the hospital for her shift, I'm serving. When I drive a student to their college interview, I'm serving. When I listen to someone who's had a bad day and just needs a kind ear, I'm serving." Kyle was crying now, not sobbing, just silent tears running down his face. "I said terrible things," Kyle whispered, "on the phone. I said you probably couldn't get a real job. I said you were a failure. I said..." He couldn't finish. "I know what you said," Richard said quietly. "I heard all of it. Why didn't you say anything? Why didn't you tell me?" Richard smiled, and it was kind. "Because I don't need to prove myself to you, or to anyone. I know who I am. I know what I've done. Your opinion doesn't change that. But I was so disrespectful." "You were," Richard agreed. "You made assumptions based on appearance and job title. You saw an old man doing what you considered low-status work, and you wrote a whole story about my life, my choices, my failures." He paused. "You were wrong. But you're not the first person to make that mistake, and you won't be the last." Kyle wiped his eyes. "I don't know what to say." "Then listen," Richard said. I'm going to tell you something that took me 35 years to fully understand. Are you ready? Kyle nodded. Value isn't determined by titles. It isn't determined by salary. It isn't determined by what others think of you. Richard leaned forward. Value is determined by how you treat people, how you serve, how you show up every day and do your best, whatever that looks like. But you were a general, and now I drive Uber. Both are honorable. Both matter. The soldiers I commanded mattered. The passengers I drive matter. There's no hierarchy of human worth. Only people trying to get through their days, trying to do good work, trying to help each other. Kyle was quiet for a long moment. Can I tell you something? He finally said. Of course. My dad, he's an immigrant. Came here from Taiwan with nothing. Worked as a janitor to put himself through night school, then worked in a factory, then finally got an engineering degree at 40. Now he's a senior engineer, makes good money. Richard nodded. Sounds like a remarkable man. He is. Kyle's voice cracked. And I've spent the last 5 years kind of embarrassed by him, by where he came from. I never tell my tech friends what he used to do. I just say he's an engineer. Why are you embarrassed? Because, Kyle struggled, because I wanted to be the guy who came from nothing, who built himself up, but I came from a dad who already did that. I went to a good college, got hired at a hot startup. I didn't struggle. I don't have a rags to riches story. So you invented struggles, Richard said, by putting down others. Kyle closed his eyes. Yeah. Your father would probably tell you that he didn't work that hard so you could look down on people doing the same jobs he did. He would, Kyle whispered. He definitely would. They sat in silence. General Morrison. Just Richard. Richard. Kyle took a breath. I'm sorry, really, truly sorry. Not just for what I said today, but for who I've been. For how I've treated people. Service workers, drivers, delivery people. I've been awful. You've been young, Richard corrected. Young and successful and surrounded by people who told you that success was the only thing that mattered. You believed them. Now you know better. What do I do now? Richard smiled. You do better. Starting now. You tip your driver generously. You thank the people who serve you food, who deliver your packages, who clean your office. You recognize that every job has dignity. Every person has a story. That's it? That's everything. Richard extended his hand. And maybe, every once in a while, you remember this ride. Remember that you can't judge a book by its cover. Remember that the person you're dismissing might have lived 10 lifetimes you can't imagine. Kyle shook his hand. I'll remember, I promise. He got out of the car, stood on the sidewalk, then leaned back in. One more question. Shoot. Why did you really retire? You could have made 4-star, could have been a combatant commander, chief of staff even. Richard thought about how to answer, then decided on the truth. Because I'd served long enough. Because I wanted to come home to my wife. Because I'd seen enough young men and women die, and I wanted to spend my last years helping people live. He paused. And because sometimes the bravest thing you can do is choose a quieter life. Kyle nodded slowly. Thank you. For the ride. For the lesson. For everything. You're welcome, Kyle. Kyle walked into his apartment, closed the door, and immediately called his father. Dad? Yeah, I'm home. Listen, I need to tell you something. I'm proud of you. Of everything you did, everything you do, and I'm sorry I've ever made you feel like it wasn't enough. On the other end, his father was quiet. Then, where's this coming from? My Uber driver was a 3-star general. What? Long story. I'll tell you Saturday. Can we have dinner? Just us? Of course, son, of course. Kyle hung up, opened the Uber app, 5 stars, and in the tip section, instead of his usual $2, he typed $100. In the comments, he wrote, General Morrison, thank you for your service, all of it. You taught me more in 20 minutes than I learned in 4 years of college. I'll never forget this ride, and I'll never forget that everyone deserves respect. Not because of what they've done, but because of who they are. You're a hero, sir. In uniform and out of it. Richard Morrison's story is a reminder. The person serving you might be extraordinary. Your Uber driver might be a general. Your barista might be a published author. Your janitor might be a decorated veteran. Respect isn't about titles. It's about recognizing the humanity in everyone you meet. If this story moved you, like this video share with someone who needs this reminder, subscribe for more stories that matter, comment your own story of being surprised by someone's background. Remember, never judge a person by their current job. You have no idea what they've accomplished, what they've survived, or why they're where they are. Treat everyone with respect, always. See you in the next story.